first of all, this is going to be a rug. This presentation isn't really about solo stakers. It's about whether or not Ethereum is really sticking to its values. So let me introduce myself first. I'm Nixo. I'm the executive director of eStaker. We are a nonprofit. We don't have a protocol. We have nothing to shill. And we are first and foremost a community of stakers. That is how I got involved in eStaker. We are committed to the health and decentralization of the validator set, and that means creating new solo stakers and supporting existing ones however we can with resources, tooling, community events, and advocacy. So we're going to go through some definitions first, because in the beginning there were solo stakers and there were professional operators, and it's gotten a lot more muddy since then. So we have solo stakers, home stakers, remote stakers, managed stakers, professional stakers, liquid stakers. So these first five, solo, home, remote, managed, and professional, these are operators who run validators whose indices they know. But of those first five, these first four are ones who are using their own capital in those validators whose indices they know. But I do want to point out that last category, managed stakers, don't actually control their config, and so that means they're not choosing the clients that they run, and they're not directly choosing whether or not they use MEV Boost or if they build blocks locally. So these first three categories are what I would call independent operators, and that's primarily who we'll be talking about here. So solo stakers, home stakers, and remote stakers. Remote stakers can be anybody who uses the cloud or uses some bare metal service but still controls the configuration of their validator. So we will go through some characteristics of independent operators, and I do want to preface this with I'm going to be focusing on the criticisms that we hear of solo stakers to genuinely address these criticisms. Solo stakers are usually difficult to organize. They don't all come to eStaker. They don't all have the same community. Some of them just set up their validator, let it run, turn on notifications, and don't pay attention otherwise. Some of them are super engaged. They're inconsistently compliant with local tax laws and local laws and tax regulations. They have no investors. They have no customers. They have no one to answer to. We have no idea if they're adhering to their local jurisdictions. They have no redundancy. So when their validator goes offline, they're offline. Nothing else flips on. And that's usually. Some stakers do, but most stakers do not. They often or sometimes have bad performance. And to illustrate this is a graph from Tony's timing.pix. And Kiln is one of the biggest professional operators, and you can see that they usually, so this is a graph from January to April of this year, and you can see that they miss less than 1% of slots. They're very good operators. In contrast, solo stakers and rocket pool node operators, and I'm using rocket pool node operators because they make up a large percentage of independent operators. They miss like 5% of slots, which is significantly different. They're poorer operators than professional operators. They react unpredictably to economic incentives. They've been referred to as irrational actors, which means that there's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation or any sort of correlation. When APR goes down, they don't necessarily exit because of the APR, and if APR went up, which really doesn't happen, there's not necessarily a correlation of solo stakers or independent operators on the network. They occasionally have poor key management. We see people come into eStaker saying, I lost my key, I don't know how to read my seed, or a lot of other things. They don't have investors, they don't have customers, and so some of them are just sort of YOLOing this. They don't have exit plans or death contingency plans. We have seen that there are Genesis validators who have been active since the Beacon chain launched, and they've been offline for months or years, and I suspect that some of those people have died, which is morbid, but when you work for a team, when you're a professional operator, you have a whole team. So if something happens to one of you, it's not that big of a deal. But with somebody who's solo staking or doing this and their husband or wife doesn't know how to recover those funds, it means that those funds are just going to stay in the Beacon chain for like 10 years till they get exited, and then they're just going to sit in a wallet. And they need a lot of help troubleshooting. This is why eStaker exists. If you go into the eStaker Discord or the eStaker subreddit, you see that it's a really active community of people who need help all the time, who are helping each other. We've got networking experts helping people who are really good at Linux but don't know anything about networking. So the natural question after this is, why the hell would we want these people running the consensus layer? Why would we want these people responsible for the security of Ethereum? And to answer that, we have to talk about the fundamental value of Ethereum. And I'm curious if anyone here is willing to throw out like one sentence about what they think the fundamental value of Ethereum is.
Censorable and permissionless base layer for building.
Love it. Love it. Okay, so let's start off from the basics. There are no unilateral decisions. To make any decisions, any proposed changes in Ethereum, you have to go through this public governance process. You have to do a bunch of research, you have to have a bunch of discussion, you have to propose an EIP, you have to go through the all-core devs call, you have to make sure that it's going to be compatible with everything else that's going into Ethereum, that's everything else that exists on Ethereum. And for this reason, it doesn't tend to favor any one company over any other company, because the devs wouldn't do a whole lot of work to favor one company over another when it doesn't benefit most of Ethereum. And there's this aspect of trustness and immutability. When you deploy a contract, when you make a transaction, once it's finalized, you can be pretty sure that nothing's going to mess with it, nobody's going to censor it. So I looked online to see what other people were saying, and I heard global settlement layer, internet of value, something software-based, easy to audit, non-reliant on human judgment, and credible neutrality. But the one I liked best was from Paul Brody, who's the head of blockchain at EY, which is one of the big 4 accounting firms. And he says, the entire value proposition of blockchain technology is built upon decentralization. For the more politically inclined, they see it as censorship resistance. For those of us in business, the value proposition is about monopoly resistance. We live in a world of extractive technology monopolies that we don't need anymore. And I love that because it highlights Ethereum as a framework for actual competition. So why would we want why would any network want independent operators? Because independent operators are an anti-fragility measure for Ethereum. They're key for censorship resistance. So if you have a couple big protocols running all of Ethereum's consensus layer, basically they can be cajoled, they can be pressured to do certain things on the network. But if you have just a few solo stakers, even just a few small percentage of solo stakers who can't be influenced, identified, organized, who aren't necessarily following their jurisdictions, like who live in a bunch of different jurisdictions, censorship contributes to censorship resistance. You only need a few who can build blocks locally. They have an outsized impact on protecting the fundamental value of Ethereum. This is a snapshot from last November of consensus layer client diversity. I'm going to assume that you guys all know about client diversity and why client diversity is important, but you can see at this snapshot, most of the network used Prism. And Rocket Pool had switched so far away from Prism that only 5% of their operators were using Prism, and they had switched to mostly Lighthouse, Teku, and Nimbus. And they were responsible for, independent operators in general, were responsible for a lot of the pressure that made larger professional operators switch away from these majority clients. And they're more ideological than profit-driven actors. So this is why I say that this presentation isn't actually about solo stakers. It's about constantly questioning whether Ethereum's fundamental value is still there. It's just how many independent operators we have is just an indicator of Ethereum's actual decentralization. Everything else is just talk. If we wanted the most efficient operators and the most efficient network, I would argue that we wouldn't use blockchain at all. So how do we keep independent operators on the network? eStaker partnered with Obel recently did a survey last month that asked a bunch of stakers their opinions on why they stake, how long they're going to stake, how they feel about staking, what kinds of hardware or software that they use. It was a lot. But one of the things we asked was, how have your views on the value of solo staking for Ethereum as a protocol changed since you first started staking? And pretty uniformly, people said that they think solo staking is as valuable for Ethereum as they did when they first started staking. But when I asked, how have your views on the value of solo staking for an individual changed since then, about a third said less favorable, meaning that they feel a little salty and that they do feel like they're not getting, that they're getting the short stick a little bit. And when I asked, when we asked how well represented they feel in protocol research, the answer was kind of a meh. It was in the middle. They didn't necessarily feel like they were getting most of the attention that they deserve. Despite this, when I asked how long people plan to run a validator, most said that they have no plans to exit, or they'll exit for an in-real-life goal. There was an equal number who said that they'll exit under a specific yield, and this is coming right after stuff like issuance debates and liquid staking protocols being more profitable than just running yourself, especially with hardware requirements. And so, so how do we keep the operators on the network? Despite this saltiness that they're feeling, we need to represent their actual needs in their own words and research. So that means getting a lot more feedback from them, encouraging them to speak up, encouraging them to come to conferences, and not letting liquid staking protocols speak for them in research in defense of solo stakers. The financial incentive needs to be from solo stakers, because if liquid staking protocols speak to defend solo stakers, I don't believe them. Economic competitiveness. Solo stakers are not, they may be ideological, but they're staking because they make money staking. They need to be economically competitive with all these other large protocols that are benefiting from the economy of scale, the economies of scale. And that means mitigating centralizing aspects of MEV and builder research, or builder dependence. That is more research, lowering the financial barrier coupled with decreasing hardware costs. That's, again, more research, stuff like Verkle trees, EIP for 4s, and research around single slot finality. And extra incentives. There's recently been a string of airdrops to solo stakers, and that is awesome. Especially because it has incentivized this organization called StakeCat to put a little bit more effort into creating a solo staker list, something that's better at identifying solo stakers, and eStaker is closely following that and hoping that future protocols that do airdrops to solo stakers use that list. There's also smoothing pools. There's Smooth and Smoothly, which anybody can donate to. And we definitely advocate for that as a way of incentivized solo staking. If any protocol wants to donate, all they have to do is send to the smoothing pool addresses. You can talk to Lansky about this afterwards. But again, sorry, these are not permanent solutions. We cannot rely on this to be the thing that incentivizes solo staking, because this is unpredictable. And it really needs to be a protocol level change that incentivizes solo staking, that changes the framework so that protocols that are benefiting from the economies of scales aren't the ones who are most profitable. We need to onboard new stakers with education, better UX, lower hardware requirements, and better software and protocols. That is all above the protocol layer. That's all really important. eStaker is doing its best to make sure that we support anybody who's working on that. So if you are working on something that is maybe open source, unincentivized, doesn't take a cut of solo stakers, if you're working on some tooling that helps but doesn't take a cut, please reach out to us. We would love to help you. And continued technical support. And again, that's where eStaker comes in. Vigilance for vectors of centralization. So that one is if a protocol comes and says, every solo staker should use us, we're a great protocol, we are some sort of layer that everybody can put on their validators, we need to be very wary of that because that does create some vulnerability in a vector of centralization. And we can't rely on their altruism. If we continue to say, oh, solo stakers will be fine because they're ideological and they're there because they want to support Ethereum, we will end up with no solo stakers. I encourage you to use this QR code or the link below it, which is the same thing, to read this blog post that Vitalik recently came out with, because he does talk about sort of this was in response to the Dankrad from the EF and Peter from Geth having a discussion about like MEV and builder centralization. And he really does a good job of talking about the current landscape, how we got there, the centralization issues, and how current research is taking us away from that direction. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nixo. Is there any questions? Yeah, please. Oop. Which one? Yeah, please.
Thank you for the talk. You mentioned like one of the criticism of individual stakers, like one of them being that they don't have the contingency plans, and secondly, they are not always compliant with like local laws and taxes and stuff. Like my question is, why do we care? Isn't this just their individual problem? If they don't stake for some reason, then that be it.
Yes, absolutely. We don't care. We don't care at all. But the thing is, like a known entity in the US or some sort of country that cares a lot about what the US is doing, if they're a known entity and the US wants them to comply with something, they can influence them. And we can't really tailor Ethereum to adhere to one jurisdiction, because then we would have to tailor Ethereum to adhere to all jurisdictions, and that would be really insanely painful.
Hello. You've mentioned this list of solo stakers, and you even mentioned that it is somewhat better than the list prepared by Rated.
Yes.
Can you name specific aspects why you believe it is better?
Yes, because the rated.network list only goes up to 500,000, the index 500,000. So the only update that they have made is basically people came in and said, I'm not on this list, and they did one update, and they do not plan on continuing to. Elias told me that he does not plan on continuing to maintain this list. Whereas GLC has done a lot of work, and he's also made an effort to exclude managed stakers. So he has two lists, one that includes one that's a floor, one that's a ceiling, and one includes a lot more, has a lot more breadth of different types of stakers, and one has just a true list of independent operators. And he is taking a lot more feedback. And in general, when I go through all of the conversation from solo stakers in both the subreddit and the Discord, they check both lists, and most of them say that they're on StakeCat's list, but there have been a lot of issues with Rated.network, and people were very upset with the last couple of airdrops that happened because they were not on that list.
So I have two questions. Recently there was a research posted about negative yield on ETH. I wanted to know your take on this.
About what?
Negative yield on ETH.
So the issuance changes.
Yes, that is one. And other is, do you think restaking could be a good incentive to keep node operators engaged?
Okay, so issuance changes. I know that it's very contentious, but I'm actually very much supportive of issuance changes, only because our current issuance regime leads to liquid staking protocols gaining more and more traction. Every percent more that we have on the network is mostly liquid staking protocols, and part of that is because of restaking, the whole restaking thing. And so I do think that I don't believe negative yield is ever going to be a good issue or a good solution, because I do think that will result in solo stakers being adversely affected in a way that liquid staking protocols can put up with for longer. But the current issuance debate is around this intermediate proposal that says let's just lower it and lower the incentive to stake while we figure out what the other things that will incentivize solo staking are. Like, I really like Vitalik's idea of correlated offline penalties because that better identifies validators who are just doing it on their own, because if 1,000 validators go offline at once, you know that it's probably a larger staker, and I don't even think it's 1,000. I think the threshold is much higher than that. But I think that it's a very good idea to have this intermediate stake rate that is lowered so that we don't have 80 or 90% stake by the time that we come up with this other issuance proposal, because then we'll have 80 to 90% arguing with the fact that they want to keep this structure that they're highly benefiting from. Oh, and restaking, I don't know a lot about restaking. All I do know is that I know it's not live in its full capacity yet, but I do know that I have seen a huge influx to liquid staking because of that, and actions speak louder than words, and they say that there's supposed to be some benefit to solo stakers, but solo stakers can't be AVSs, so I don't really know how much it's going to help solo stakers, especially in light of the fact that APR is going down because they're incentivizing liquid staking so hard on Eigenlayer. Well, you know what I mean. Yeah.
Thank you, Nixo. Is there any question? No. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the participation.